Alright, so this is a real good all-around streamer. I mean, I've caught everything from steelhead to nice browns and brook trout and smallmouth. It's just real good all-arounder. It's a combination of a few different patterns from Kelly Gallup's Smoke Show. It's got a little bit of Furburger in there. Also takes a lot from my buddy Damien's Bunny Leech pattern. So I've been kind of calling it the Smoking Bunny. But it's a real simple tie. I'll tie it real slow so you guys can see what's going on here. It can be tied in a whole range of different colors. But hopefully you guys learned something from this. Anyways, right now I have a Daiichi 1720 in a size 4 in the vise here. You can really use whatever type of streamer hook you want. I also have some 140 denier wood duck colored ultra thread. I just like that because it's a real neutral thread and good and strong, kind of blends in with anything no matter what the different color scheme you're going for is. But again, can always be changed out. So we'll start our thread here. We want to make sure we save a little bit of room up at the eye so we don't overcrowd our head, which is pretty easy to do on this fly. Kind of a lot going on at the end there. That's probably one of the more difficult parts about tying this fly, is that it seems like you always either end up with a little bit too much room at the head or you run out of room. So it's just one of those things that after you tie, a half a dozen or so, you'll get the feel of it and about where things should be spaced. But I typically like about a hook eye in length there. So bring our thread just to about the point of the barb there. The tail of this one I'm gonna tie with a shell pink color, but I like to use blood quills, strong blood quills here, and pick out a nice full looking feather. Here's one. And another thing I like to do with most of my marabou is you'll notice on the tips of these feathers they're all kind of straight and not that full. So what I'll do is I'll just line those up, and you'll be able to see in those feathers, which is right about here, where they start to fill out a little bit more. So I'll just take my scissors, line that up, and peel just the tips of those feathers off. I don't like to cut because that gives it just kind of a almost too straight, unnatural look. When you break them off like that, I think it just gives it a better looking. So now it's a lot more full, which I like. I wet these just so it's a little easier to manage. Measure everything out so it's about hook shank length there. That looks good. I'll tie her in. When I travel up here, I don't worry about locking it in super tight because I'm going to be going back on it, and that's when I really worry about securing that feather well. I like to cut this marabou so it ends right about where we tied in our thread. You can see we ended there, and here's where I'll go back and really tighten down on that marabou. Make sure it stays nice and secure. And you don't have to worry about getting the underbody of this fly super pretty and perfect and smooth because we're going to be covering it up. So we're right about here. Now I'm going to add in my wire. For this, I'm using brassy sized hot orange ultra wire. Again, colors can be changed depending on whatever kind of color scheme you're going to be going for. This hot orange is I don't know, it's just kind of a good all-arounder color, I've noticed. The chartreuse wire seems to be a good color too. So we'll tie this in here. A lot of times I'll advance my thread back up to the start of that marabou there and tie in our ultra wire again so so the tip of that ultra wire is matching up just with our marabou. And then I keep it right on the side of the hook shank here. It'd be the side facing me. Get that secured down pretty well. Right back to our tie-in point. Get that out of the way. Now I like to tie, you can use like diamond pearl braid, yarn also works decent enough, but I've really been liking this cactus chenille and pearl. And it can be kind of deceiving about how much you're going to need. And there's a few different ways you can tie it in, but what I like to do is just leave it in this ball here. Just so I'm not wasting any material or don't cut a piece that ends up being too short. And just like anytime you tie a chenille, pick off some of them fuzzies on the end so you get a good tie-in point. Tie this in here so your chenille is going to start right there. And then what you're going to want to do is advance your thread just so it's at about the tip of the hook there, the tip of the hook point. So we can start wrapping this. Another thing I like to do is once you get one full good wrap on it like that, you want to try not to get back on that marabou too much because you want to make sure that stuff can really play out and breathe. I'll take and I'll just tighten up on that cactus chenille a little bit. So there I have 2 wraps as everything is tangling in my bobbin. And this first bit will probably be about 4 to 5 wraps around. So there's 4, and there's 5. So I'll take this and I will secure this with just a couple tight wraps because we're going to be tying in more here. And now for the underside of this fly, I basically, it's just like the belly on a smoke show if you've ever tied one of them. I like to use woolly bugger marabou for this. It's just real nice, fluffy, light stuff. And what you're going to want to do is start off just by peeling small clumps of this woolly bugger marabou off of the stem here. And when you get to tying in these belly fibers, it is best to go light, you know, to err on the side of being too light of material than too much material, because the lighter this marabou is tied in, the more it's going to flow and breathe and that type of stuff. And the length I go on this is so that it falls back just about halfway through the tail there, or about halfway through the clump of the last marabou you tied in. So I'll slide this up underneath and kind of pin it there, and then take kind of a loose wrap on it. And once you get that loose wrap, you can get this marabou down to exactly where you want it. And then kind of hold her back here so you can take a couple more good wraps on it. Then you can get in here, cut off these butt ends. Then I'll hold my chenille out of the way, and I'll advance my thread a little bit more so we can do about 4 more wraps and tie in another clump of that. So this first wrap of the chenille here, we're going to want to go right over our thread and right over that marabou to kind of hold that marabou back a little bit. So there we got another 4 wraps. Tie this off again with just a couple wraps. And as you work your way up the belly of this fly, you want to slightly increase the thickness of this marabou that you add. So here, right here, I got just a little bit of a thicker piece. Again, we're going to measure that out, so it's going to come about halfway back to where I tied in that last piece. Get that pinned to about where you want it. And a loose wrap. And then you can shift this straight onto the underside of the fly here. And tie her off. Trim our butts. Advance our thread again. And repeat the process. Again, kind of holding that marabou back, so you can wrap slightly over the top of it to hold it back to kind of help build up that bait fish profile. Here's our 4 wraps. And again, just slightly increasing the thickness of this clump you tie in as you work your way towards the head of the fly. Get our measurement here. Lock her down with a couple good wraps. You can always cut this chenille off at the end of every 4 wraps, just to make this part a little bit easier so you don't got it tangling up and getting in your way, but I just like to do it this way because it seems to be a little faster. Less time to tie in and that type of stuff. So now if we even this out right, these last ones should come right about in front of your tie-in point here. One more there. Bam. At this point, you can actually cut your chenille off. And lock that down pretty decent. And we can tie in our last bit of marabou here. On this marabou tool, you can, that feather's about used up, so I'm going to grab a new one here. But like I said, it's good to use to err on the side of light just to really get this fly breathing when it's in the water. But this furthest forward piece will be your thickest bit of marabou. And that's just to help build up the profile of a bait fish when it's in the water. Get our measurement here. So there's that. So now we can kind of wrap up this here and just clean up so we have a decent tie-in spot all over here. That's about good there. Come in and trim some of this extra stuff up on the front here, like so. And now, take your rabbit strip. For this fly, I'm going to be using chinchilla color. Again, any color you really want works very well for this. Grizzly, natural grizzly seems to be a very good color. Olive is always very good. This chinchilla seems to work really well. I've also had a lot of really good luck with just white. So what I'll do here is just kind of lay that on top, and then you can kind of take the top of the fur here and line it up so that fur is going to be just about even with your tail. So I'm about right there. Then you can follow those back, and that'll show you about where you need to cut it. So we end up with that there. And I also like to just cut the underside of this leather strip of these rabbit strips, just so you get a little point to it. And I feel like that helps the tail really just kick and move when you're fishing this fly. So you end up with something like that. Then I just peel some of this fur right off the end of this leather strip so that I can get a good hold on this thing when I tie it in. So we'll lay that up top. And what I found works best for tying in rabbit strips like this is get a little bit of thread out, give it a good counterclockwise twist so that thread's going to want to jump back on top of it. And then we'll tie that thing in there. Not really cooperating with me right now. There we go. We'll tie this in here. And work your way back to the tie-in point so that we can catch our wire. Right about there. So this, as this lays back, you can see that the top of the fur here extends just slightly past the tail, but not much. And now we'll take our wire that we tied in, and that's how we're going to secure this rabbit strip right to the top. If you wet your fingers here, it just makes the fur a little bit easier to manage as you're doing this. So we'll pull back slightly to get that tight on there, and then we can just capture this just like that. Keep that rabbit strip centered right on the top of your hook shank. And then I like to do one wrap back behind that first clump of marabou you tied in, like so, just to really make sure we have the back side of this rabbit strip secured well. We'll kind of do the same thing. Find our tie-in point here. For these first few wraps of wire, I like to keep a little bit of back pressure on this rabbit strip just to make sure to keep it fairly tight. Just like so. Now you can reach in here with your bodkin and kind of move these pieces of marabou out of your way as you're wrapping so you don't accidentally secure them to the body of the fly. And I think this is a very important step, is to make sure that you are trapping the most minimal amount of this rabbit fur as you can as you are wrapping this forward, because this rabbit fur really does move a lot in the water, and if you are trapping a bunch of it with your wire, you're obviously going to minimize the movement. And just try to work your way with this wire in between those clumps of marabou that you'd have tied on the belly of the fly. And then as I come around this front side here, I get one little wrap just on the front side of that marabou to hold that front piece of marabou back. So we can wrap that around, secure our wire. Oop, I bumped the camera here. So we'll secure our wire into place. Then you can cut or break off with your wire, whatever you prefer. Then we'll just kind of smooth out where that wire is tied, so we can tie in our last part of the fly here, like so. So at this point, the fly's almost done. And all I'm gonna do here is tie in a rump feather from a pheasant. Yeah, it's just kind of the front hackle on this. Hungarian partridge also works really well. Hen feathers would work really well too. Just some sort of soft, webby, soft hackle. Something that's gonna move a lot in the water. I like to tie in from the tip. Again, if you give your bobbin a good counterclockwise wrap, makes securing this feather a little bit easier. Like so. And you can wrap it by hand, but these little plunger style hackle pliers I've really been a fan of them lately. And just like wrapping really any soft hackle, as we wrap this, So we want to make sure we don't trap any of our marabou here. We kind of want to preen these feathers rearwards as we wrap. And really just one turn should be about all you need for this fly. I mean, we already have a lot of different moving parts here, and with the Hungarian feathers it's not as big of a deal, but sometimes with these pheasant rump feathers, when you get more towards the butt of these feathers, that stem is going to get a little stiffer. You can always soak it in warm water to loosen it up a little bit, but so we'll secure this. And we'll just kind of clean up our head here. Trim off that bit of extra stem. And we'll kind of hold our feathers back as we just clean up the head of this fly here. I like a little bit of a larger head on these flies. One, because it just makes them, we got a lot going on here at the head of this fly, and it just makes it look a little bit neater, I think. So after we get that kind of smoothed out, we can whip finish. Just 4 or 5 turn whip finish is fine. We got one guy that's not really cooperating with us, so we can just pluck him out of there. And then what I like to do, just basically you could fish the fly just like this and it's going to be fine, but for a little bit of added durability, I put a little bit of UV head cement over the head of this fly. It's just a lot of times when you're fishing the streamer, especially for smallmouth or larger trout, anything like that, they can have teeth and be in a pretty aggressive take, so a little bit of added durability doesn't hurt anything. So I just here have some Loon Flow. It's a real thin UV. We'll just put a little bit on there. I'll hit that. When I'm using any type of UV products like this, as I'm applying it, I like to preen these soft hackles back, just so you don't get any UV resin inside the hackles, which could impair any movement. I mean, a little bit probably isn't going to hurt anything, but the more movement, the better in a fly like this. So take the fly out, and just apply a little bit to the bottom side of it here. With the rotary vise, this can be done in all one step, but my vise isn't a true rotary, so with this flow, it's a pretty thin, runny stuff. So if I spin the vise as I'm doing this, it'll want to drain that UV resin back into the soft hackle. So there it is. It's the smoking bunny. I said, a really great all-around streamer pattern. You can see it's got just a lot of stuff that moves in the water. This fly breathes extremely well, fishes well. It's a very durable fly. It's got a good bait fish profile. Had a lot of luck on it with multiple different species, and you can fish it basically as subtly or aggressive as you want to. It works very well in an aggressive strip retrieve. You can just let it dead drift and kind of swing along the current. My favorite way to retrieve it is give it a couple, 2-3 real good aggressive strips, and then just pause the fly and let it float there, because everything on this fly will kind of move and drift with the current and stuff like that. So pause it for a couple seconds and then give it, a few more hard retrieves and just repeat that until you get a fish. So there it is. Any feedback would be greatly appreciated. I hope you guys like the fly, and I'll catch you next time.